Historically, connecting to the electricity network has been a flow one way from a central power station through the transmission system, distribution system, and through the end user. And the distribution system is managed by the 6 DNOs that we can see on this map, and we regulate them at Ofgem. So we've seen a growth in DG. So essentially it's a change for the DNOs. They've had to review their processes, the way they work. It's a whole new culture change. And so solar PV is one of those technologies that will be connecting to the distribution network. And why are we seeing this increase? Because the government's increased incentivised renewable energy to meet 2020 targets and to reduce CO2 emissions, and programmes such as feed-in tariffs and RHI are helping people to do that. So if I come on to the regulatory framework, Ofgem, our principal statutory duty is to protect energy consumers, and so we regulate energy network companies in order to do this. We've got several tools, mechanisms at our disposal to do this, and I'll focus on price controls because they're the sort of central and core part of our regulatory arrangements. So in a price control review, we set a limit on the amount of revenue that companies can collect during that period. Historically, that's been 5 years, and we're now extending that. That's a longer term period to 8 years. So DNOs are funded for efficient expenditure, and if their costs are lower than the allowed revenue, then they get to keep a share of the profits, and vice versa. And through the RIO programme that Dave mentioned, they can also earn rewards or penalties through their delivery of set outputs. So just the timetable at the bottom, we're now just at the beginning of this week, we received the business plans, and we're in the process of going through these business plans and assessing them to see what the DNOs said that they're going to do from 2015 to 2023. But we're currently in DPCR5, so that's what we're monitoring at the moment, which is 2010 to 2015, but we're looking forward to the next 8 years. This is just the timetable in terms of where we are. We issued a consultation that we then took into account the responses. We made a strategy decision in March, and all through that period we've had stakeholder engagement groups to represent the needs of stakeholders as well as DNOs, so that when we came to make our decision in March, publish our decision, that hopefully took into account the responses that we'd had. So we're now in the stage of July, we've got the business plans, and we'll go through an assessment period right until 2015, and some of those DNOs may be fast-tracked and some may not, but that's what we're doing at the moment, just in terms of reviewing. So in terms of RIO ED1, the key challenges, really it's the, how can we ensure that low technologies can connect in an appropriate time and at an appropriate cost when there are so many uncertainties, I think, around new technologies, the characteristics and rate and location and take-up of electric vehicles, PV, wind, etc., and how do DNOs plan for that? So, in terms of how can they plan to invest, but what we've really pushed for is a greater use of smart grid technology and demand-side response to maximise the network flexibility, but all doing this at minimum cost. And we've tried to look at the factors that will influence that, so feed-in tariffs, other incentive mechanisms, planning rules, how all these will come into play to affect the take-up of these measures. And I suppose this bit, in terms of efficient investment, is what sits behind the way that we regulate. And because we're protecting the consumer, our constant challenge is to make sure that we balance the requirements of connecting customers with all those customers who use the system. And we understand and we hear from connecting customers that they want cheap and quick connections, and we have to make sure that we try and ensure that DNOs deliver this alongside efficient investment on behalf of all the customers who use the system. And we can't discriminate between demand and generation connecting customers. So the regulation tools that we must put in place should ensure that there's efficient development of the network to provide long-term value for money, with also efficient connection times. And ideally, we point the DNOs to look for, to give locational signals for connection customers to connect where there's spare capacity in order to make best use of the distribution network and the existing assets. And this is all to try and avoid use of system customers paying for stranded assets that will then later not get used. The Act and the associated regulations require DNOs to charge connecting customers. They have to offer connections and to charge connecting customers the efficient costs that they impose on the network to ensure that the network develops efficiently and to encourage new connectees to make use of existing capacity. So that sort of backs up, I think, what Dave said in terms of DNOs have to listen to you, they have to offer you a connection, and they have to charge what's appropriate for that connection. The framework that we've put in place in conjunction with stakeholders should provide the flexibility to drive efficient outcomes in the vast majority of cases. So it should incentivise connection where there's spare capacity, incentivise alternative commercial arrangements to reduce connection charges, and make sure that the DNOs don't take risk on investments with Duos customers' money. And in our decision in March, we set out that we're open to DNOs submitting a case for strategic investment that shares risks appropriately on a project-by-project basis. And I'll cover this in the next slide. So if they can demonstrate that there are benefits of a strategic approach, then we can consider allowing Duos funding up to equivalent of the incremental approach, and we expect the DNOs to pass some of the benefits to Duos customers due to the increased risk. So in practice, if the DNOs and customers sign a Section 22 agreement, then they can set their own terms outside the Act and regulations, which could allow upfront user commitment arrangement between DNO and customers, third parties who want DNOs to invest strategically. This would give the DNO confidence to start work knowing that they can recover costs, and it removes the risk for Duos customers, so there won't be stranded assets out there. And it also encourages the DNO to undertake significant stakeholder engagement, whilst also reducing the costs to the connection customers. In terms of what we set out in the strategy for distributed generation specifically, we'd heard over the last year or two in the DG Forum from London First, commercial businesses and lots of other stakeholders that major connection customers, and I'm sure you heard some this morning, are encountering a number of difficulties in connecting to the network. So in our strategy, we chose three specific areas: the quality of the connection, the provision of information and the timeliness of connection, of areas to incentivise the DNOs to improve, to give a better service for you. And we did that by strengthening existing incentives, such as the broad measure of customer satisfaction, which incentivises DNOs to reduce their complaints times and number of complaints, to resolve them much quicker, and to also increase their levels of stakeholder engagement, to make sure that they are talking to their customers and they're listening to what you want and what you've got to say. We also have introduced two new incentives. The first is a time to connect, which is for minor connections customers, so for small demand customers, and that's just to incentivise the DNOs to reduce the whole time, connection time, in terms of issuing a quote and getting connected. And there's money attached to that, and also a new incentive on connection engagement, which is where it specifically helps DG customers. So I'll focus on that in this slide. So the incentive on connections engagement is to ensure that DNOs really go out and speak to their customers to make sure that they understand and meet the needs of these new types of customers. So historically they didn't have to do this, and now there's an emphasis on for them to go out and find the customers and ask you what it is that you need and what you want. And through this process they have to submit evidence of how they've identified who you are and how they've engaged and responded to your needs. And we split the connections market up into different market segments, which represents a different type of customer. and DG customers is one of these segments. So they have to produce a separate submission for each segment. There are also licence requirements for all DNOs that sit underneath these. The guaranteed standards of performance in connections. They also have to publish a long-term development statement so that you can see what their future plans are, and a DG connections guide. But just to talk you through an example of what they have to do, they have to set out a strategy of how they're going to engage with their customers in that market segment. And this is it's to emulate a competitive market, I suppose. So this is for DNOs who haven't passed the competition test in this market. For those who have, they don't have to do this because we believe that competition should bring about this behaviour. But for those who haven't, they have to go out and set out a strategy of how they're going to engage with you. They have to carry out stakeholder mapping, and then they have to keep a record of all that engagement, details of who came, what they said. They put together an annual work plan with smart targets in terms of what they're going to do, how they're going to address the issues that you've raised, and where they're not going to, why not, what are the reasons for that. And then they seek approval from the stakeholders on the work plan and publish it on their website. And then we measure them against the commitments that they made, and we have a set of minimum criteria. So they have to deliver against this, and they have to seek continual feedback from all their stakeholders and carry out a variety of assessment and validation mechanisms to do that. Just to state, I suppose, just as a safety, this is a draft worked example, so we're still in the process. It doesn't start till 2015. We're still engaging with DNOs and other stakeholders in terms of what this will actually look like. But this is the sort of broad idea of where we'll go. So any feedback that you have will be useful for that. And actually, I should also mention we met a group of DG representatives a few weeks ago and talked through this process with them, and I think there was somebody from there was definitely a PV representative, but I can't remember whether it was somebody from the Solar Trade Association, and they've all said they want to get involved, so we'll make sure that your comments can get fed back. How can you get involved? Well, I suppose through the trade associations involved, and then also the DG forums. Last year was the second year running. They ran one in 2011, and then I arranged the 3 last year. We had over 300 people attending. We had the CEOs from the DNOs come and report back in terms of what they'd achieved over the last year, because I think there was some feedback that there hadn't been much progress from 2011 to 2012. So the CEOs came and said what they'd done, and whilst they were there, they committed to producing these work plans from 2012 to 2013. And it's a platform really for customers, DG connection customers, to speak directly with DNOs. Ofgem's there, so we can hear what you're saying, we can hear what the problems are, and if there are lots of shared problems across the DNOs, this is where we try to feed it into the Rio ED1 process and improve that through our regulatory tools. But it was also an initial platform to set up between customers and DNOs, and to encourage DNOs to take that forward and engage with you individually, to make sure that they are listening and they are changing their systems and processes where appropriate to make sure that they're accommodating your needs. Some of the things that came out of the DG Forum were more surgeries, offering more feedback events and individual DNO events. They publish these work plans on their website, and they also send them to Ofgem. So we publish them all on our website, and then we ask for quarterly updates. And so DNOs have to submit quarterly updates in terms of what they've achieved to the targets of their work plans, and we're in the process of going through the second quarter at the moment. And then there'll be a follow-up event, DG Forum 2013, and that's just the DNOs, I think, are going to arrange that, but Ofgem will be there listening to your views and just to hear the feedback in terms of what's happened in the last year and if you feel that progress has been made. And that's it. Thank you.